Lovelies, and welcome back to the Fluffenhammer Adjacent, and welcome to Codex Death Guard Day. Yes, it's not released today. Codex Death Guard 9th edition. It's not released today. It's up for pre-orders today. It might look like an unusual move from Games Workshop's perspective. I mean, it might seem more obvious that the Chaos Space Marines should have followed the same pattern as the Loyalist Space Marines, i.e. the core codex is released first and then all of the divergent chapters, legions, warbands, whatever, come later on in the form of supplements or their own codices or whatnot. But I can see why they've done this. I can definitely see why they've done this from a sheer marketing perspective, from a purely mercenary perspective, because of course the Death Guard range is almost full. It's one of those unusual armies in 40k that has a model for every entry. It doesn't really need any additions or anything to shore it up. And besides which, the base level 8th edition codex is still pretty good. It's still quite a coherent piece of work. So all they really have to do is build upon and elaborate upon what's gone before, which is really, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, really. And it's interesting on a number of levels because we're going to be able to see from this what shape Chaos is generally going to take in 9th edition. I mean, the Death Guard are one of the more divergent Chaos Space Marine armies. There's no doubt about that. That's why they warrant their own entire codex rather than just a supplement. You know, like most of the Loyalist legions, obviously Chaos is going to have a slightly different shape to the way they're doing the Loyalist Space Marines. And I think that makes sense because there's just more variety in Chaos. That's the truth of the matter. Even the most divergent Loyalist chapters still adhere to certain strictures and patterns that are common amongst all Loyalist Space Marines, largely because of the influence of the Codex Astartes. You know, the very, very large and ever-thickening tome that Robert Guilliman penned and prescribed to the Loyalist Space Marine legions regarding their modus operandi, their means and manners of war, and indeed their cultures and their organization. That still holds true, even for chapters like the Space Wolves, which are very divergent, even for chapters like what others are real? Oh, the Blood Angels and Dark Angels to a certain degree are quite divergent. They've got lots of interesting nuances and deviations that make them unique. The Black Templars are quite different. Crusade chapter organized slightly differently, treat their aspirants in a very different way. What others are there? The Salamanders are pretty. The White Scars. The White Scars are pretty divergent as well. But even given those divergences and differences, the Codex Astartes is still the core template for their organization, and also the fact that they are culturally adherent to the Imperium of Man means that they are always going to have certain things in common. Okay, there are conflicts in terms of belief and culture. For example, the Ultramarines are very different to the Black Templars. The Dark Angels are very different to the Space Wolves, but they still have certain narratives in common. The Chaos Space Marines, not so much. The Chaos Space Marines are very divergent. I mean, even those that probably will come under the core Chaos Space Marine Codex, so the likes of the Word Bearers and the Night Lords, for example, organizationally completely different, like totally divergent, that you couldn't get two more different armies if they came from different races, you know? The Word Bearers are massively organized for a Chaos Space Marine Legion. They have a core homeworld, they have a core authority in the form of the Dark Council and Lorgar, their Primarch. Everything is prescriptive in the Word Bearers, so they do as they are told. They bow down to the will of the Dark Council, of their Dark Apostles, of their prophets and their messiahs, and very much to Lorgar and the prescriptions of Chaos itself, whereas the Night Lords don't. They are not devout, they don't worship the Chaos gods, they make use of them, when it's convenient for them to do so, but they don't worship them. And they are not an organized legion. They're scattered all over the place. They are just roving warbands, each of which has its own set of beliefs and cultures and modus operandi, to the point whereby different Night Lord armies often fight. They often conflict with one another because they interpret the philosophies of the now dead Night Haunter, of course. They don't have any central authority. They don't have a homeworld. They don't have a Primarch to prescribe to them. There's no equivalent of the Dark Council, so there's no figure that is cohering the entire Legion. They are just separate warbands all doing their own thing. In terms of character, they're completely different. They are self-interested sadists. Everything the Night Lords do is as a result of their own inclinations. They don't care about any wider cause, any greater ideal. They're completely nihilistic and misanthropic. They don't have like any utopian ideals. The Word-Bearers do. The Word-Bearers seek to create what they consider to be a better tomorrow for humanity and for themselves under the auspices of chaos. You know, that's what they genuinely believe. They believe that chaos is the fundamental metaphysics of this universe, and they believe that the only way for humanity to actually survive and thrive and sort of metaphysically transcend itself, its own condition, is through chaos. The Night Lords don't believe that. They don't believe that. They are just self-interested pirates, sadists, and reavers who do whatever they want. They have the power and the means to do whatever they want, to indulge any whim they like. They do whatever they like, and that's it. So you could not get two more divergent armies, even if they were of separate races. You just couldn't get two more different armies. So I imagine what will happen with the Chaos Space Marines, like the core, what I suppose you could call the Undivided chapters, and the Renegade warbands, is that they will get their core codex, the Chaos Space Marine Codex or the Heretic Astartes Codex, very like the Loyalist Codex, and then you'll get add-ons, you'll get supplements that detail divergent characters, different units that the different warbands use, and that kind of thing. That would be my guess. But for armies like the Death Guard, I suppose what have become known as the cult legions, that is the original Chaos Space Marine legions, the ones that were originally detailed in the very first Chaos Space Marine books, the Realms of Chaos books, which are the Emperor's Children for Slaanesh, the Thousand Sons for Tzeentch, the World Eaters for Khorne, and of the Death Guard for Nurgle. I imagine each of them is going to get their own codex eventually, because they need it. They really need it. Those armies are so divergent because they actually adhere to the worship of chaos, individual chaos gods, each of which is antithetical to one another, some of which are totally antithetical to one another. So like the World Eaters and the Emperor's Children are the opposites of one another, even though they're cohered under the auspices of chaos, or the defining keyword of chaos. They are philosophical, ideological opposites of one another. Their chaos powers operate on opposite ends of the chaotic spectrum. On the eight-pointed star of chaos, they occupy opposite arrows. They are completely antithetical to one another, to the point whereby they hate one another more than they hate loyalist legions for the most part, you know? And that filters down not only in terms of their beliefs, the way they operate, but their organization as well. So you can't really have the Emperor's Children and the World Eaters operating from the same codex. It doesn't really work, which has been a problem for Chaos for the longest time, to be perfectly honest. The Thousand Sons and the Death Guard are exactly the same. They are completely removed from your core Chaos Space Marines, like physically as well. Like they are physically apart from the other Chaos Space Marines. Like the Black Legion and the Word Bearers often confabulate. They often have a certain overlap in terms of their goals and their beliefs. The Night Lords and it's the Black Legion really that coheres them all together. It's the authority of Abaddon really, because he is like the arch messiah of chaos. But the cult legions are different. They're all different because they all have first of all, their Primarchs are alive. Their Primarchs are still around. And not only are they still around, they're very, very, very active in the current state of play. It was the case for the longest time that they weren't, that they were like distant figures. They were sort of consigned to their demon worlds in the Eye of Terror, but that's simply not the case anymore. You look at the Thousand Sons, they're not even in the Eye of Terror anymore. Their whole demon world, Sorciarius, is in the Imperium. It's in Imperial space. It's like this stronghold of chaos in Imperial space now, thanks to the sorcerous efforts of Magnus and his legion. So they are physically removed from all the other legions. They are following their own very inscrutable agendas. The Death Guard are slightly different in the sense that they still operate from within the Eye of Terror. The Plague Planet is still within the Eye of Terror, and also they are slightly more scattered. So you've got different Victoria, which are like the war bands of the Death Guard, which are massive, by the way. The Victoria of the Death Guard are enormous. Some of them are bigger than chapters, you know? You've got them all over the universe. They all answer to Mortarion, even the ones that are sort of divergent from him in philosophy, like, for example, the first Victorium, which is Typhus's lot. I think they're called the Harbingers. The Harbingers are philosophically very different from Mortarion, and from what Mortarion prescribes, because of course there's a lot of friction between Typhus and Mortarion. There's a lot of philosophical friction. Mortarion, he exemplifies different aspects of Nurgle from Typhus. Mortarion is the slow rot of ages. He is slow decay and the sinking into inevitable despair, whereas Typhus is much more dynamic. He's much more the ravaging pandemic. You know, he is what happens when Nurgle's blood is roused, essentially. Neither one of them are more legitimate than the other. They are both totally legitimate manifestations of Nurgle's aspects. It's just that they represent how various even armies within the auspices of a single chaos power can be, and that's clearly defined. I mean, it's going to be clearly defined in this codex. I mean, we've had loads of leaks, we've had tons of leaks. We know so much about this codex now, and it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating. In the recent Psychic Awakening campaign, which defined the end of 8th Ed, we of course had descriptions and rules for each of the most prominent Victoriums of the Death Guard, and they're massively divergent. They're massively divergent in terms of what they believe, how they operate, but also what diseases they have. So physically how they manifest is different from one another. That's all within the auspices of Nurgle worship. You can see now why all of this shit, all of this stuff cannot fit in a single codex that also has all of the stuff from the other Chaos Powers and the Undivided Legions and the Renegade chapters. This is the way to go. I mean, they've known this for the longest time. I mean, they've even done this in Age of Sigmar, where they've separated out the different forces of chaos because it's been necessary. And in the Age of Sigmar, it's not, I mean, there's more overlap than not amongst the different chaos forces, but even there they've had to do it. So in 40k, where it's so divergent and so various, of course they've had to do it. Of course they have. But I'm so glad they've started with the Death Guard as a way in, as a way of showing what's going to be happening for chaos further down the line, because there is overlap. I mean, things like, we know that the demon engines are very different now. They've changed the way demon engines operate, and thank God for that. Because demon engines have been, to be honest, guys, demon engines haven't been very good since they were introduced into 40k. Demon engines have never been any good because they've been hampered for some reason by some very lackluster rules. Some very lackluster rules. They've either been, like when they were originally introduced in 6th Ed, when they really took over everything and you couldn't really move for chaos armies that had hell drakes because they were just well overpowered, to the point whereby they had to come in and actually nerf the hell drake at one point, or they were just terrible, like the forge fiends. You couldn't, or the defilers as they were back then, defilers and forge fiends, they couldn't hit anything. They were long range units that just couldn't hit anything. They were just not very good. They have obviously taken that on board with the new 9th Ed Codex, and these factors will carry over to both the Thousand Sons and the core Chaos Space Marine Codex, I have no doubt. So now demon engines are much tougher. They're much tougher than they used to be, much more survivable, and they can hit things. They have better ballistic skill. They can hit things with their weaponry, which makes them much nastier. And it makes sense. It makes sense because one of the things I really want to see more of with regards to Chaos armies is how the technology of Chaos Space Marines has changed down the millennia. It has been the case for way too long that Chaos Space Marine armies have just been using spiky or mutated derivations of what the Imperialists use, and even then, just not as much. They don't have access to as much. I don't see why that would be the case. I don't understand why things have not changed dramatically for the Traitor Legions, and you're seeing that in the Death Guard. The Death Guard do have their own suites of demon engines and machines and weaponry. It makes a lot of sense for that. It makes a lot of sense. I really want to see it with the Thousand Sons. I can see why they didn't do the Thousand Sons first, because unlike the Death Guard, which have pretty much every unit, they already have every unit accounted for in terms of models, in terms of rules and whatnot. The Thousand Sons don't. The Thousand Sons need a bit of a shot in the arm. They're going to need more than just a terrain piece and one or two new characters to make them viable. I wouldn't mind seeing the introduction of more mortal units. So, one of the things they could do, because they did this with 8th Ed, which, okay, some people didn't like, some people considered this to be cheap, but I liked it. I thought it was kind of cool. They took some of the AOS units and sort of grafted them over into 40k. So you got things like the Zarngor and whatnot, the Mutilath Vortex Beasts. There's no reason why we couldn't do more of that. There's no reason why we couldn't have not only dedicated 40k models, like, for example, guys, why don't the Thousand Sons have a psychic dreadnought of some description, or like a psychic demon engine? It doesn't really make any sense that they don't, It doesn't make any sense at all that they don't. Why don't they have these psychically infused and sorcerously capable demon engines? It doesn't really make sense that they don't. But like mortal units, like the Kyric Acolytes, they could be translated over very easily. Very easily. They could just be the Thrall Wizards, the Thrall Sorcerers that the Thousand Sons are known to use in the existing background. I mean, even the 8th Ed Thousand Sons Codex talks about these guys. The fact that they have these little bands of psychically capable human beings who they use largely as fodder. They're basically, not only can they cast spells of their own, but they use them as sacrifices and things during battle. So why not? Why can't we have that? We could also have, some of the weirder elements from the Slaves to Darkness, from the Disciples of Tzeentch, things like the Gaunt Summoners. There's no reason why the Gaunt Summoners can't cross over into 40k. They are demons of Tzeentch, so why don't they exist for the Thousand Sons, Stuff like that. But one of the other things we really need for the Thousand Sons is some dedicated units, some dedicated Thousand Sons units. So instead of just having access to the demon engines from the other Traitor Legions, so sort of like the default demon engines, why not some Tzeentch-specific demon engines, like the ones from Epic, perhaps? The Silver Towers. The Silver Towers are an obvious one. Thousand Sons have always been described as having access to Silver Towers, which are these multi-dimensional mobile towers which are also dimensionally linked to the Crystal Labyrinth of Tzeentch, which can move all over the universe. There's no reason why there shouldn't be a little terrain feature or something, which is maybe a part of a Silver Tower that we can use. Something like that would be great. But for the Death Guard, everything is more or less there. That hasn't stopped them, of course. There are new Death Guard models. There's new character models. They've also, from what we've seen, they've enhanced so much for the Death Guard. They've enhanced so much. Mortarion is a beast. We've got the rules for Mortarion now. Not all of them. We still don't know what his psychic powers do. But he's an absolute beast. He's so survivable now. For a big miniature with lots of wounds, he's so survivable because of the special rules applied to him. And he's a beast. He's an absolute monster, as you'd expect from the Primarch of the Death Guard. And also, one of the best miniatures that's been released for years. One of the centerpiece models in any game system. Mortarion is absolutely beautiful. But yeah, I'm so pleased. I've always loved the Death Guard. I've always loved the Death Guard. There's something about their character that I really love. I love the fact that they are the despair that they manifest. I mean, you have to look at the Death Guard in terms of their history to understand what they represent. Like, the Death Guard were once upon a time, before their corruption, before they fell to Nurgle, they prided themselves on being able to endure anything, on being able to sustain within environments that even other space marines couldn't, that were too toxic for other space marines, to the point whereby they would even like breathe and ingest toxins and poisons to adapt to them. That's what Mortarion does. That's why he's got that rebreather on his face. When he was mortal, quote unquote, when he was just a normal Primarch, quote unquote, he would filter toxins and poisons and viruses through his own body to demonstrate, look how tough I am, or to anneal himself to these environments, you know? Now, of course, he does it because he's a Nurgle worshipper, and basically disease and toxins are just wonderful insofar as he's concerned. They basically sustain him. They make him stronger rather than weaker. But the fact that Nurgle came along and afflicted them with the Destroyer Plague when they were becalmed in the warp, and this was a disease that not only infected the Death Guard, but for the first time in their existence made them feel real pain, real agony, real despair. There's a great sequence in The Buried Dagger, the Horus Heresy book, where it is describing this exact situation, where you've got Death Guard going mad because of the diseases afflicting them and because they can't fight them, and Mortarion is looking on. He's watching through like these sealed bulkheads as these entire Medicaid levels of Death Guard are going mad with the diseases afflicting them, but not dying. They can't even find any release in death, and he is sinking deeper and deeper and deeper into despair because there's nothing he can do. He's very close. Mortarion is very sentimental, oddly, which of course again lends itself to Nurgle worship, because Nurgle's very sentimental as well. And the fact that there's nothing he can do for himself or for his legion. He can't help his sons. He can't even go into the same room as them without risking himself, without becoming infected. It's the very utter depths of despair. It's basically taken this legion that operated on a culture of strength and endurance and broken down its entire ethos and its spirit to nothing, and then built it back up again. Ironically, it's dynamically similar to what abusers do. And that's very interesting, because I think we spoke in the last video about how Nurgle is very much an abusive parent. He seems to represent the most negative, toxic, narcissistic elements of parenthood. And that's exactly what he did to the Death Guard. It's exactly what narcissists and abusers do, where they break you down and then build you back. They sort of seem to build you back up, but in their own image, in ways that they want you to be. A really good example of that, by the way, as a tangent, is Mother Gothel from the Disney adaptation of Tangled. The way she breaks Rapunzel down and then says, "Oh, I'm only kidding, you know I love you." You know, she calls her stupid, she calls her clumsy, she calls her foolish, and they just, "Oh, I'm only joking, you know I love you." That's the classic toxic, narcissist, abusive thing for a parent to do. And Nurgle is exactly that. It's exactly that. It's the sham of sentimentality, when in fact what they really want is for those under their sway to just be puppets or reflections of their own desires, of their own wants. That's what Nurgle does to the Death Guard and to Mortarion. Mortarion, by the end, is just, he's lost. He's broken. There's nothing left of him. And he has nothing left of everything and anything he believed in. Nothing. He's done. And then he finds Nurgle, or rather, Nurgle finds him. And there is just a glimmer. You know, Nurgle offers false hope, essentially. Or rather, he offers not even false hope, but like meaning in the despair, in the abjection. He basically promotes that this is the truth of everything. This is the truth of the universe. This fundamental despair. There's nothing to fight for but me. You know? I will tell you the truth. I will love you. I am the only one who can give you poetry and meaning in this state of abjection and relief. I can give you not only relief, I can give you purpose. That everything you've ever wanted, I can give everything you've been seeking for. And Mortarion, obviously, that is what he's wanted. He's always wanted that. And he thought he'd found it in Horus, and Horus obviously kind of betrayed him. You know, Horus is the one who basically left him to get stranded in the warp, and to eventually succumb to Nurgle worship. So even that has failed. But Nurgle is the one who comes along, and that's what's happened. You know, he has become the very manifestation of despair. He's basically the prince of despair at this point, which is so cool. It's so cool. And down the centuries, down the millennia, as the Death Guard have rotted and mutated and transformed and become these walking vectors of so many demonic, unnatural diseases, they've branched off and become they've developed their own little schools of very conservative ideology, and they have all come to manifest different aspects of what Nurgle is about. So some of the Vectoria, they manifest the same despair that Mortarion does. They actually hate themselves and they hate their state, but they think that it's true. They think that this is what the universe is. They think it's just sludge and rot and despair, and that somehow there's some grim, melancholy truth that they're spreading when they've basically come to topple the lie of hope. And I kind of love that. Others are they're more like the sloppity bile pipers or the great unclean ones. They genuinely believe that what they're doing is great and wonderful, and that Nurgle is grandfather Nurgle, you know, that he loves all of his children and he loves the universe, and all he's doing is spreading his beneficence far and wide. And they believe that's what they're doing. And they are like the great unclean ones. They are gregarious, they're fun, they sing, you know. What I love about the Death Guard, certainly in the way they've manifested since 8th Ed, since they got their own codex, is there's so much going on in them. There's so much character. And again, this is within one legion. All of this variation is within one legion. That's why they need their own codex. And I tell you what, from what we've seen, this new codex is amazing. In terms of the rules, have you seen the rules for the Crusade system? Where you can create your own diseases. You can actually cobble together your own custom diseases to define your particular Vectorium. That is fantastic. That's exactly what I love. The role-playing elements, it's wonderful. I love that so much. I can't wait to see what they've done with the different characters of the Death Guard. Things like the Plague Surgeons, the what are the ones that carry the dolorous toxins, the ones with the big bells on their backs, all of these wonderful characters. I cannot wait to see the Tallymen. I loved the Tallymen in 8th Ed. They needed a bit of they need to be rewritten in terms of their rules, definitely for 9th Ed. But what I'm hoping is that they now manifest like the chaplains, because they are the equivalents of chaplains in the Death Guard. So I'm hoping that there are like laws of different prayers that they can offer to Nurgle, perhaps. That would be fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Things like the summoning rules, how do they work now? How do the Death Guard interact with Nurgle demons? Or is that not really going to be revealed until the core demon codex? Maybe the summoning rules will be in that instead of in the different Chaos Space Marine codexes. Who knows? Not sure yet, but we'll find out very soon. Cannot wait to see it. I'm ecstatic about this. I really am. Love the Death Guard so much. I mean, just aesthetically, the Plague Marines they are one of the most iconic units in 40k. They've been around for ages. The Plague Marines have been around since the Lost and the Damned, and that's really interesting because a lot of the cult units haven't. Like the Khorne Berserkers and the Noise Marines, they didn't come up. They weren't in the Realms of Chaos books. They didn't come about until way later. You had sort of like putative equivalents of them back then, but they were not the same. The Plague Marines have been around since then. They are one of the oldest cult units in that regard. The Thousand Sons, like what we know now, the Rubricae, they didn't come in until 2nd Ed. They are actually one of the youngest of the cult units, the Rubricae. Thousand Sons, the whole notion of the Rubric of Ahriman didn't come about until the 2nd Ed Chaos Codex. So, yeah, it's really interesting. They're so iconic, the Plague Marines. They are so iconic. And it's wonderful to see them at last getting models that warrant them, you know? They've always had issues, the Plague. I mean, I liked the second ed metal models, they were very good, but they've never really captured the essence of the Plague Marines for me. Now they do. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like it. They have a problem with like the over sculpting and elaboration of them, the sort of the fleshy abundance of them, if you like, because each model in a Death Guard army is basically a character. They have so much detail. They have so much that's unique about them. There's very little uniformity about them, and I love that. I actually love that to bits. Some people don't. It's against their aesthetic. It's okay, you know? But I love it. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I think the Death Guard are in one of the best places of any Chaos Legion in 40k at the moment, definitely. It's going to be fascinating to see what comes later down the line. It's very good to see, for example, a Chaos Army having as much attention thrown at it in 40k as they do in Age of Sigmar. The Age of Sigmar Chaos books are great. All of them are great. Okay, the Maggotkin is a bit old now. It could do with an update, definitely. To introduce things like Nurgle Endless spells and that kind of thing. A few more mortal units, definitely. But it's still really good. It's still really good and characterful and fun, and has got so much oozing ethos and atmosphere about it. It hasn't really been the case for Chaos armies in 40k. They've always had problems with them. They've always suffered from like their legacy. What I'm really hoping when we get the core Chaos Space Marine Codex is that they've paid attention to what needs to be done. That it's not just a rehash of 8th Ed with a few bells and whistles. That they've looked at Chaos and thought, okay, they need to be different. We need to grind them down to base elements and look at them again. Let's not look at the history of them. Let's try and do something new with them. Let's distinguish them from their loyalist counterparts. People are sick to death of loyalists but with less equipment and spikes, you know? People are sick to death of that. Let's do something new and fun and interesting with them. They warrant it. I mean, come on. Chaos is the big bad guy in 40k. I mean, I love the Xenos armies, I really do, but Chaos is the one, isn't it? It is the ultimate nemesis in 40k. They deserve better. They really do. They should at least be the equivalent of the Loyalists, you know, in terms of the variety and power that they have. That is absolutely true. They need to be scary. Chaos needs to be scary. And, you know, fingers crossed, it looks like they've done that with the Death Guard. Let's hope that translates over to the other Chaos powers, eh? Until next time, my loves, bye-bye!